Descent into Avernus is an official module for D&D 5e. It has a very, very cool premise and some interesting ideas, and it's deeply, deeply flawed. It's broken in all kind of narrative ways, and if you run it as is, I doubt that you'll have a good time. It can take quite a bit of time and effort to turn this into a great game, and I think that you should do it because it'll force you to think about storytelling and character motivation in an interesting way and really discover the type of story that you like best. Now I'm going to expand on that and tell you a little bit about my experience running the game and the resources that I used to make it into what I feel turned out to be a great game. So welcome to Polyhedron, I'm Ron. And obviously huge spoilers for Descent into Avernus, so if you're a player in a campaign, maybe don't watch this video. The idea at the core of this campaign is that there's a city that's been wiped from existence. More specifically, it was taken to Hell, or Avernus, one of the layers of the 9 hells in the Forgotten Realms. The players need to find out what happened to the city, and they get themselves involved in cult and city politics, and they go to Hell to save the city. And beyond having some great concepts and opportunities to explore interesting themes of morality and a descent into darkness, there's plenty of things here that are just awesome, like Mad Max style vehicle warfare in hell. But once you start reading the book, or pretty much any Reddit thread about it, or watch any YouTube video about it, you start to see the problems. Like how the whole thing starts in Baldurs Gate and the players have nothing to do with the city that went to hell, or the coolest scene in the game, a city being dragged into another plane of existence, all happens off screen to other people. And then as the story gets going, you find plenty of other narrative issues that make prepping this game really, really hard. The whole Baldurs Gate section of the game is awkward and was clearly put there to tie into Baldurs Gate 3, but I do have to say that there's enough information in this book for you to run just an amazing Baldur's Gate street crime game that has nothing to do with Avernus. So if that sounds interesting, think about picking up this book. To get a few things out of the way, this is an expensive book, and throughout this video I'm going to mention a few other paid products that personally I used, and you're probably thinking, well, if I pay all this money for the book, I want to be able to run it out of the box, and I agree in principle, but it's just not the case with this book. I really do feel I gained a lot from tinkering with the story here, so learning experience, I don't know. So first thing, remember to approach this book, or any module really, as a source book more than anything else. These books are not ready-made stories for you to tell. They are collections of things you can use to tell your own story. And ideally, read the whole thing before running it. I promise you that I didn't, but at least, kind of flip through it. The first major problem I wanted to fix was tying the characters to El Terrell, the damned city. I wanted the characters to actually care about the city going to hell and want to do something about it. So at the recommendation of Sly Flourish, who has an amazing series on his channel where he just walks you through his entire prep for the game, I got Fall of El Terrell, a quick 2 to 3 hour adventure that starts off the characters in El Terrell and has them take a quick mission taking down some cultists, and then they get back to the city just in time to watch it get dragged into hell, which is awesome. It was an explosive end to the first session. Everyone was excited. Highly recommend it. Now that we have a strong start, we need to decide what we're going to do with Baldur's Gate. I'm sure you could find a clever way to skip the whole thing, but I did like the city and I wanted them to have a bit of a detective story where they try to figure things out. So on session 2, we skipped 2 weeks into the future. They're at the gates of Baldur's Gate, and we did a few roleplay scenes of things that happen on the caravan ride over from El Terrell to Baldur's Gate as they helped refugees on their way. And I had everybody describe their characters' experiences over the journey over. How are they feeling? How are they taking it? Does it fill them with a fiery sense of purpose or just an overwhelming sense of loss? In the city itself, there's this whole thing in the book about the Flaming Fists, this mercenary organization that became sort of the police for the lower city of Baldur's Gate, where the common folk live. I actually really like the concept of the Flaming Fist, but it just doesn't really have anything to do with the story. one of my characters actually was a Flaming Fist, who was part of the diplomatic expedition to El Terrell, so they did use her connections. She was also secretly a guardian of the shield, which made for some interesting scenes later. I can go into this in more detail. For most of what happened in the city, I used the Alexandrian remix. It's a massive series of articles completely reimagining this campaign, injecting more lore, political subterfuge, and honestly brilliant game design. It is, however, a lot. And it goes into insane amounts of detail that could easily send you into hours and hours and hours of prep, which can be fun. So if you want to do that, more power to you. My advice is to read through it until you get bored and then just take the things that look cool, of which there are many. This guy is clearly very, very smart and creative, and don't worry about the rest. Remember, when you over prepare, you will most likely not get to use most of the stuff that you prep. I used these great notes that he has in there that the characters can find on the corpses of cultists in the Dungeon of the Dead 3, which is a cool dungeon, but very poorly balanced. It might have, the most difficult fight in the game, which was actually awesome. Just remember not to fireball a group of level 2 characters because you'll kill them and it won't be fun. I had them on level 3 by the time we got there, just because I read someone on Reddit said, don't have them level 2 in this dungeon because they'll die. For the rest of the time in the city, I loosely followed the Alexandrian remix with a focus on players discovering that cultists are killing them. For the rest of the time in the city, I loosely followed the remix with a focus on players discovering that cultists are killing descendants of Hellriders, and then discovering that Amric Vanthampur is connected. They made an alliance with him. They ended up killing his mom and putting him in power. It was great. There was whole a political thing going on, and much of it was improvised just based on the things I read in the remix. And in the huge section about the city in the book, which again is great, it's just helpful to know this stuff so you can just pull them out of your sleeve just at the right moment in the game. So that's why I liked just reading all this stuff, even if I didn't include it in my prep. The Baldurs Gate portion of the game ended with the characters killing Thalamara Vanthampur, who is a Zerial worshipping, cultist employing, Hellrider killing woman of industry. There was also a cool part where the players found some Tiamat-related dragon relics and gave them to dragon cultists in exchange for help taking down the Vanthampurs. And this turned out to be cool because later in the game, much later when they were in Hell, they found out that those relics were instrumental in the ritual to release Tiamat, which, by the way, was just completely improvised because I remembered that they did this thing in Baldur's Gate. So that's why I'm saying don't stress out too much about prep. Just do a general high-level preparation of, your maps, your NPCs, the situations in general. And these cool connections are going to pop up. Just make notes of them. Also, in the Vanthampur villa or manor, whatever it was, they discover that it is Thivius Krieg himself who doomed the city, which was a really cool moment. It was particularly cool because all those notes I mentioned earlier, they found on, cultists in the Dungeons of the Dead 3, those were all signed TK. And you might think it's super obvious, and it is, but in the middle of the game with lots of stuff going on, if you don't stress that TK too much, there's a good chance that your players will miss it. Mine did, and it was awesome when they saw Krieg and they were like, of course, Thivius Krieg, TK, of course it was you. So by the end of this part, they found some clues that all point to Candlekeep. Maybe a better DM can pull this part off, but parts like this is where it's essentially you have to go to this place for the story to happen, and I find it to always be a bit clunky, and it's part of what draws me now to games like Dungeon World and Blades in the Dark, where you kind of make everything up as you go along, but just living in this fictional world. You create the story by playing rather than having a story told. So they get to Candlekeep. We did a few D&D shenanigans on the way, gotta have those. Candlekeep was pretty quick, one session where they hung out in Candlekeep for a little bit. They got fined for using magic, and then they caught up with the wizard that reveals that the city is actually in Avernus, and that Thivius made a deal with Zariel that damns not only them and everybody in the city, but also all of their potential future descendants. It's really cool to hold off on this reveal until Candlekeep. So after this big reveal, El Turel is actually in hell right now and you can go save it. They learn they can actually go there, so they do. They choose to go to hell. One of the characters actually stayed behind, which was a cool chance for that player to change characters, and they get to hell. I'm not going to go through how I ran all of Avernus because that would be a very, very long video, but I will give you some advice that I think is useful. For most of Avernus, I used an amazing resource from Aventire Games called the Complete DM's Guide for Descent into Avernus. I'll put links for everything down below. It includes 2 main PDFs, which were hugely useful. One is the guide itself, which goes chapter by chapter and gives you suggestions, all of which are great. And they also have Avernus as a sandbox, which we'll get to in a second. The bit in El Turel, I pretty much ran exactly how they suggest in the DM's guide. Once you get into Avernus proper, that's really where you have to start treating this chunk master of a book as a toolbox, not as a linear story. The structure of these chapters in here is all go to this place, fetch this thing, give it to this guy who will then ask you to fetch something else, and then, you know, on and on and on. Go through the locations in Avernus, go through the book, or even just their summaries in the Aventire Games Guide. Decide which ones you think are cool and only expose those as options to your players. Avernus as a sandbox is amazing. It takes all of these locations from here and helps you structure them in a true sandbox where the characters know the big things that they have to do. They know the destination: destroy the chains that hold El Turel, destroy the contract that binds it, and return the city to Faerun. Then, you know, they have a few locations that they think they can go to start working on these challenges. Once they do that, they then are revealed to have a few more locations they can choose from. There's a ton of player agency this way while still having a good sense of direction. One of the cool things that happened was that the characters went to talk to Archon, and he told them that they have to get a hold of a pure good creature so he could suck the life out of it with the hand of Vecna to power it so he could release Tiamat. So they did that, and they got Mooncolor, the unicorn, and they brought it back to Archon, and it was an emotional moment. And they released Tiamat, and Tiamat broke the chains for them. And it was this awesome, you know, epic moment, which created a problem because now they have to deal with Tiamat being loose in Avernus, which was, again, one of those things that we improvised a hook for. Towards the end, I had Asmodius, basically Satan, show up and tell them that he doesn't really care about how all of this plays out, but if one of the party agrees to stay back in Avernus and replace Zariel as the Archduke, he'll take them directly to the Bleeding Citadel, which is where the sword is, and they eventually agreed. And that was my sneaky way to avoid the scab, which I'm told can be cool, but I felt that another dungeon crawl would just slow the game down at this point. So they went directly to the Bleeding Citadel and they got the sword. We played through a bit of the flashback sequence in Idle Glen where you see Angel Zariel fight a demon lord. I definitely didn't do the whole thing because it would have been way too long, but I did want them to see Angel Zariel take those first steps into Avernus, and I wanted them to fight the Demon Lord and get him a bit weaker for Zariel. And then later, when they met Zariel in the final showdown, she remembered them from that moment. So it wasn't a flashback, it was actually a time travel paradox, time loop sort of thing, which makes no sense, but I thought was very cool. Anyway, I'm happy to do another video going into the details of everything that we did, but in the end, they failed to convince Zariel to be good again, so they fought and killed her, and then one of them had to stay back as the Archduke of Avernus, which I think was awesome, and we did the whole thing about what happened to the characters afterwards. One of them went on to become the ruler of El Turel, and all in all, I thought it was a great ending. So all of this to say, I had to do a ton of work to make this damn thing actually work. And D&D is, I love D&D, I do, but the system itself doesn't make anything easier. From a storytelling perspective and managing high level characters, like you end this at level 11 or 12, can be a chore. But having done all of that work, I feel it made me a better storyteller, a better DM. It made it easier to improvise in future games, and I find it easier to run games now. So if you think the premise is cool, I encourage you to take a plunge into this mess of a campaign that is called Descent into Avernus. Go to hell. It's essentially what I'm saying. Let me know if you want me to give you more details, or I'd love to hear about your experiences running this game. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It took me a year we played this game. A full year of like quarantines and lockdowns pretty much. So it was still a good time. Go play a game. And yeah, go play a game. Bye.